20 years ago, a reality TV series about a struggling promotion aired on Spike TV that, for better or worse, would go on to change the landscape of sports and pop culture. This is a retrospective of that series, its key players, and its lasting legacy. This is TUFtwenty.
TUFtwenty is brought to you by The Contrarians, a movie podcast where we are right and you're wrong. Be sure to subscribe to The Contrarians on your favorite podcatcher for access to this entire series, as well as Julio and Alex's most recent film follies. Our main website, wearethecontrarians.com, houses all of our past episodes as well.
You can find The Contrarians across social media under the handle @ContrarianPrime.
It's not just us, though. As for this 14-part journey of nostalgia and shame, we've got a championship corner.
I'm Joe Holbert, and for years I've discussed fake fighting on the internet. Now, however, I'm trying my hand at the real thing. Usually, you can find me at the Late Night Grim, but for this particular adventure, I'll be sitting under the Team Couture learning tree, providing insight to my fellow men of honor.
It's niche micro-celebrity Steve. You may know me from Twitter, the Songs with Friends podcast, or various scuffles in the world of professional wrestling. By the end of this journey, you are no doubt going to feel this, because this is the ultimate.
Now that the cage door is locked, let's get down to business.
Time to talk asparagus.
All right, boys, the fight is on. It is day 21. We've arrived at Josh Koscheck versus Chris Leben. One man stays, one man goes home, as it is episode number 6 of The Ultimate Fighter. The aforementioned title, The Fight is On, airing on February 21st of 2005. Man, we had a hell of a time with our previous episode and the shenanigans and escapades that the cast of TUF1 got into. And so now I think it's time to bring it back to reality. And there's nothing more sobering than the open of this episode where Randy Couture dresses down the cast like he's he's like the teacher that was out for a day and the substitute left like a really bad report. And he comes in and talks about, you guys are letting me down. You're here to honor the sport and show America what we could be. It's a hell of a speech he gives there. As I mentioned, February 21st, 2005, week after Valentine's Day. Steve, I think I know the answer to this. The number one song in the country at the time. But for the shits and giggles, let's just count down the top 5 and see what people were bumping.
All right, man. Number 5, we got a newcomer. We have 50 Cent with Disco Inferno.
Ooh.
The Game, How We Do, is number 4, also featuring 50 Cent. So he's having himself a Rick Moranis year, 50 was. Number 3, Boulevard of Broken Dreams. Number 2, Sierra and Missy Elliott, 1-2 Step. And number 1, the king, the champ, the absolute god of this shit, Mario with Let Me Love You.
Let's go. Julio, this is a film podcast after all. So was Ice Cube still holding strong in the top 5 films in the country?
Well, only one way to find out, Alex. This is week number 6. So this is February 18th, as you all remember. Will Smith was reigning supreme last week, but Ice Cube was holding on. It was number 4. Are We There Yet? And Hitch was number 1. So for this week, do we have newcomers? Yeah, we do have newcomers. Ice Cube's still there. Number 5, 9 million. Are We There Yet? This has made a total of 72 million so far. So
there you go, Cube.
Yeah. Has there been an Are We There Yet too? It feels like
yes,
the kind of movie that, okay.
Are We Done Yet was the sequel.
Oh, damn it. I was hoping it was going to be called We Are There Now.
What now?
If the answer to that was no, then I was going to just be like, just give it time. Give it time. They're working on it.
The Legacy sequel, where the kids are driving him now.
Oh,
number 4, $1 Million Baby. It's still hanging strong. 10 more million to 57 million total. Number 3, newcomer. I don't know if any of you remember this movie. I remember it just because Dave Matthews was in the trailer because of Winn-Dixie. 15 million opening. I think it's based on a book. I think Winn-Dixie's a dog. It's one of those kid movies.
Not the grocery store.
No. Or maybe. I haven't seen it. I just remember the trailer. Number 2 was the biggest debut. Constantine, 38.9 million. Keanu Reeves, not playing the John Constantine from the comics, but still making enough of an impression, I think.
You a fan of that, Julio?
Retroactively, at the time when it came out, I was like, this is not John Constantine. This is Keanu Reeves. But over the years, I've developed some fondness just for the fact that they went there.
Your girl's in it too, right?
Is it Rachel Weisz in that one? Yeah, that's right. She plays twins because she dies at the beginning and then she shows up again. And it turns out that was the twin sister.
Isn't Peter Stormare the bad guy?
No, he's Satan, who turns out at the very end.
Yes, but what does he play in that movie?
Is he the bad guy? No, he's Satan.
I was going to say.
Well, he shows up to spoilers for Constantine. He actually saves Constantine at the end because he makes a deal. No, you're right. He is the bad guy. Turns out Satan can't be trusted even when you make a deal with him. Yes.
I'm pretty sure the only time he's been the good guy is in Dancer in the Dark.
Oh, Peter Stormare, not Satan. Yes, you're right.
Oh, yeah.
No, the only time Satan was a good guy was when he threw the boxing match against Jesus on South Park.
There you go.
Yeah, I guess doesn't he have a what you would call a face turn in the South Park movie? Doesn't he betray Saddam?
Yes.
He does.
There you go.
Hey, Satan, let's fuck. That's what I always think
Insider
of.
terminology on this program. I love to hear it. Tremendous.
All right. Well, number one, it's anticlimactic because Alex, you called it Hitch for second week in a row, 42 million, adding up to 101 million total. And second week, it was good to be Will Smith. Remember those days?
Yeah, I do. That guy ruled shit for 20 years, man. Longer than that, 30 years.
If Will Smith and Mario had done a song together that year, we would still be talking about
it. All right. Well, Will and Mario, I think, might need to get used to their names here for a little while at least. Mario, we're already well acquainted with, but leading in to The Ultimate Fighter, you couldn't have scripted it any better, my friends. The UFC had a big one on their hands here with this episode, the Koscheck Leben dynamic. And leading into it was a hot finish to Monday Night Raw. The show was at the Bryce Jordan Center, State College, Pennsylvania. And we saw Trish Stratus defeat Molly Holly and Victoria in a triple threat match. That'd actually probably be good if it got some time. Only got 350. Chris Jericho defeated Simon Dean in 339. Kane defeated Tyson Tomko. Man, that's a Tokyo Dome main event right there. 3 minutes, 15 seconds. Randy Orton and Shawn Michaels defeated Edge and Christian teaming in 05. That's interesting. 17-25. Chris Masters defeated Steven Richards in 152. And then Shelton Benjamin retained the Intercontinental title by defeating Gene Snitsky in 308. But all of that shit is superfluous. Steve, do you remember the significance of this show, its closing segment?
It is all about the game and how you play it. And that night was Big Dave's choice between Raw or SmackDown and the infamous thumbs down. I'm coming for you, brother. Big ankle to go home for Mania.
Julio, this is, you can trace Dave Bautista's breakout to superstardom to this one moment. Joe, if you could just explain, the broad strokes to people who may not be familiar with that storyline. What happened with Dave Bautista and Triple H that culminated on this night?
Well, Dave Bautista had been the heavy in Triple H's Evolution group. And by winning the Royal Rumble, he could pick which world champion he would be challenging. One of the world champions was Triple H. So naturally, he was being kind of led in the direction of picking the other champion. They could both have a belt each. But this had been developed very gradually. Some of the best week-to-week stuff they've actually ever done, legitimately. It would be called cinema nowadays, but it was a different time then. And this was, as you mentioned, this was the decision segment. And so the audience, even though Dave had been a villain as this kind of heavy, an enforcer, he was badass, right? People liked him. They thought he was cool. So they wanted him to rebel against Triple H and turn to the good side. And that is indeed what happened, which is why Alex mentioned that this basically shapes the rest of his wrestling career. And now, obviously, what has become since that. So this is probably the best. Where would this rank among best WWE angles of the decade? Like, it's really up there, right? This is like a classic. And people still talk about it now.
Yeah, I'm actually getting chills just thinking about how it played out in my head. So Julio, what they did was they had like the general manager from each show out there, and there were two contracts on the table, one for Triple H and one for JBL. And Triple H is out there and he's like, because he knows Batista can beat him. That's the idea. And so he's like, make the right decision, Dave. And Dave's like, I've known what I'm going to do for a long time. And he picks up, the contract for SmackDown, which is the other title. And Triple H then gives him the double thumbs up, and Batista kind of cracks a smile and gives him a thumbs up, and then goes stone face and turns the thumb down, and then like throws the contract and wipes out Triple H, wipes out Ric Flair, and then he picks up the Raw contract and signs it. And yeah, that's Dave Bautista. I think now, for me personally, in the moment, I didn't grasp like what a draw and how big that dude was in wrestling. And this is definitely the moment that like pushed him over, because you can, if you watch it, like it's one of those crowd reactions that's just like, you know, reverberating in the arena.
Because they were ready to cheer him, right? It had been building up very, very gradually. It's one of those moments where they waited just long enough and then they leaned into the people's love for him, and he's like one of the top two baby faces for the next 3 years at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I tweeted through this whole thing during COVID, and they started teasing right after Survivor Series in November.
Wow.
Just little glances, little crumbs.
I remember that Raw that ended where he raised Triple H's hand with the belt, and then he glared up at the belt for just like a second. And I remember that, like, oh shit.
Yeah. See, wrestling can be good occasionally.
Yeah, it picked up after the first week of January pay-per-view, the New Year's, whatever the hell it was called.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, they just started going into overdrive with making you crave this Batista turn until it finally happened in February 21st.
So, Alex, you said that you didn't appreciate it at the time, that what Batista really brought to the table. When exactly did you start appreciating it? Guardians of the Galaxy 1, Volume 2, or perhaps Volume 3? Did it take you that long?
Stuber was the one, in fact. That
Fuck you.
I have to say, though, I mean, obviously the Batista thing is like kind of the biggest deal on the show, but you mentioned Chris Masters beat Stevie Richards. And very quickly, because I know we have other things to talk about, do we know if that was the match where Chris like he killed Stevie and like broke his...
It was.
Okay.
The Polish hammer to the nose that night.
And have you guys heard what Arn Anderson allegedly said once that was done?
No.
Don't worry, it's only Stevie. That's what he said. So
yeah. It was this night because the first week of March was the Ring of Honor Trios tournament. And Stevie was there.
Beast.
And that's where they got that picture backstage of Punk and Stevie with the sign that said no Polish hammers.
With Batista, the closing remark on that is, without this moment, Julio, he may not be the only person to ever main event a WrestleMania that is also a part of a ride at Disney World. So, you know, who's to say where this would have gone? I remember coming out of that Guardians of the Galaxy ride and just turning to my dad and I'm like, I think that's the only ride here that has a WrestleMania main eventer in it. He did not find it funny. All right. So now, before we get in the episode, we're going to talk about something that I know is very near and dear to Joe's heart, and that is television ratings. This episode of Raw, for total viewers live and same day, 4,993,000. And the overrun with the Batista segment did break the 5 million viewer mark. Joey, if I was to say, or I was just to acknowledge that the Raw rating from this week is less than 1/4 of that, would that make me a hater?
That would absolutely make you a hater. You would pull up some graphs and some charts, study and learn about television industry nowadays. Otherwise, you will, quote, drown in your own stupidity, is the quote that I believe happens if you don't learn about those things. So,
to go back to something we had talked about in the first episode, the Monday Night Raw lead-in and the Vince McMahon approval, that's been disputed that Vince had the final say on, Vince couldn't tell the network, no, you're going to put this on at 5 a.m. on Wednesdays. But Raw was easily their biggest show at the time, so they definitely wanted him on board to go through with this. And I think he just didn't care. I think that's been established. He didn't care, and that he didn't think it would affect his audience at all. Which it didn't, right? People just watch TV differently now. So the debut of The Ultimate Fighter kept 57% of the Raw audience, which is a very impressive number. So that equates to roughly around that time about 2 million people or so. And this is where the show would kind of settle in. Its ratings did increase. So the debut obviously was a bit higher than the others. For about the first half of the season, it was averaging around a 1.5, I believe, is what I read, Nielsen rating. So just a little under 2 million viewers. And then towards the end of the season, and specifically at this point being like the fulcrum, it would go up and average around 2 million viewers each week. So definitely good numbers for them at this point. An audience the size of that is, like we were talking about, Joe, I think their highest buy rate at this point was just over 100,000 people. So this was better than they could have expected, I think. And they definitely knew it and leveraged this conflict with Koscheck and Leben to their advantage. Because even like rewatching this, we're not even watching commercials or anything, but it's very clear what the goal is here to tantalize the viewer.
So you agree with Randy when he says that they're being the ambassadors of UFC to the average person?
I'm a big believer in Coach Couture, even though he never wins. And even I, at this point, I took my green jacket off and I said, Randy, this is hypocritical. And thankfully, we'll get in. Some of the guys actually called him out on this. But as the lead supporter of Chris Leben, this is an insane speech to give to the squad.
Something even more impressive about those numbers is that you remember that this aired at anywhere from 11:05 to 11:20 start time on a Monday night on the East Coast.
The thing is, guys, we have to be careful with the ratings tool because by the time that this broadcast, Shockwave will be on the air for All Elite Wrestling, doing 15 million viewers each week. So, we're kind of going to erase our talking points, sadly. But we'll stick it. We'll leave it in nonetheless. We'll go for it.
And we will circle back. So, Joe, just... you can rest knowing that we'll circle back to ratings talk when we get to the finale because, man, there is some lore around the ratings of that finale.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
But here for episode 6, let's get to it, boys. Let's get it on, as Big John McCarthy would say. Sadly, he's not here, but we do get another one of the all-time great MMA refs that I popped hard for. Watching the opening, I had forgotten that Ludinson Cade had existed. I was like, oh, yeah, that guy. Randy dresses down the fighters. They're supposed to be ambassadors to show this country what we are as martial artists. It's a lot more than just fighting in a cage. And Chuck's standing there just kind of nodding off, or checking his BlackBerry, like wondering if the bank transfer had gone through to Willa Ford yet. And to Joe's point, though, back at the house, the blue team are like whispering shit talk about Randy Couture, and Koscheck has the awesome line of like, I almost walked out of there when he said that. And who is it? It's him, Ken Flo, and I think Josh Rafferty. They're just talking shit.
Florian, that's like a kind of a big moment for Ken Flo to have that line, right?
Yes. I think he also said something in the previous episode. So I was looking at my note from episode 5, and I don't remember what it is, but I just wrote, I'm with Florian. So he must have called out the hypocrisy or just the fact that Leben is playing the victim card really hard, as if he hadn't been a shit stirrer for 4 episodes before he finally got picked on. So no sympathy on my end. I mean, you guys, Steve, we already know where you were when you first watched this. But I'm curious you said it too, like on a rewatch, do you find that you still have some sympathy for Leben? And I don't know, Joe, Alex, like I had zero sympathy, but from the beginning, from the first episode, you guys know that I just didn't like him. And so I was like, fuck him, make him cry again.
I think there's a connection that because we watched his career that follows this, sympathy's too strong, but you kind of like, I think there's a greater understanding of just how deeply troubled he was as a character. Mm-hmm. And because in fear of going full Bobby South, well, not maybe, Bobby's probably the wrong comparison, but in fear of doing the Warrior thing, as fight fans, there is a sort of people like Chris Leben because of the way he fought. And so you kind of go, yeah, he's an asshole, and yeah, he did piss on that guy's pillow, and yeah, he did this, that. But man, he didn't even be mean to him on that night, that one night that Bobby South. Like, from your perspective, I see no reason why you should be like, man, poor Chris Leben. Like, absolutely not. He's been an asshole on the entire show. So yeah, I get it.
I remember watching in real time, and again, this was my senior year of high school, so 17. I remember the thing with Leben that got me excited about this. He's the only guy on this show, if you'll recall, they show a clip of him fighting, like one of his fights when he knocked out Mike Swick. And the way they talk about him is he's just a fucking marauder, And so I remember the intrigue being, what is he going to do when he actually gets in the cage? That was kind of the appeal. And rewatching it now, 20 years later, they're doing something that historically, Steve, has worked in professional wrestling. They're kind of presenting him as like a tweener. And Koscheck is like the clear heel, though. So I would argue they're trying to present him as like, the Steve Austin of the first season of The Ultimate Fighter.
Something that we didn't really touch on before Randy gave his dad speech, Dana addressed the troops. And one of those talking points was no alcohol in the house from this point forward. Mm-hmm. There's reason to believe that that Chris Leben at this point was an alcoholic. At the very least, he was drinking most days, if not all days, in the house. And I dare say that he may have had some lingering health issues in the house that may have affected his performance on this fight. Oh. If you go cold turkey from alcohol, it's a lot different.
Stop making excuses for your boy.
Hey, this is not.
Next thing you're gonna tell me that his knuckle wasn't there.
This is not wrestling fan, fight fan Steve, podcaster guy talking. This is registered nurse Steve talking. Who has extensive experience in detoxification, and it is life threatening to go cold turkey like that. In a past episode, when one of the guys when Diego went to the doctor. In passing, they mentioned, last Tuesday I saw you, and this was a situation. That leads me to believe they're under more medical supervision than we think. So I don't know if they kind of saw this coming with Leben and got him started on some Librium or something to make sure he didn't actually die while also weight cutting for a fight.
Well, to be fair, you say that he was drinking every day. He has quit around 6 times to this point. He may have taken a few days off. In fairness, Steve, come on.
Chuck Liddell told him just to cut out the Gatorade and don't eat like shit, Yeah. He's like,
right.
Be at the gym at 8 a.m. You'll be all right.
It's so funny because that's the first thing we do on the detox unit is make sure the Gatorade is out first thing in the morning. But yeah, when I rewatched it, my opinion quickly changed of Leben. Once I got caught up, I'm like, all right, I get it. Like, he's lucky they didn't piss on him while he was asleep.
Yeah, he's a dick. And like after every fight, he explains why the guy lost. Like, it's hard to have a lot of sympathy for him, to be honest, based on the show itself.
And also just with the sensibilities changing and shit, that we were all having a good time reminiscing of Josh Koscheck's drunken antics. He's just so funny in that episode, like retrospectively, I guess. And yeah, Julio, there is some context with Leben and Koscheck and the way their careers went after this that I think when we get to the end of this and do like the retrospective, you'll kind of appreciate some of their quirks a little bit more. But he, this fucking knuckle, he's taking the bandage off right in front of the Avril Lavigne picture and rinsing the knuckle off in the sink. And he's, hamming it up. He's selling it pretty well. And then it cuts to Koscheck laying down on his side, just looking at Kenny Flora, and he goes, white trash. That's all he is.
He is so funny in this, man. He's so funny. Like, again, we're kind of talking about what's coming ahead in their careers, and Josh Koscheck he may be one of the most famed, like, again, use the term heels in MMA history, right? That was kind of the role. But he is really funny in this, it has to be said. Every line has got, like, the way he delivers it is tremendous.
I called this out in the last episode, how conditions are just deteriorating. Leben has a mattress with no cover on it propped up against a wall that he's leaning on and like laying down, explaining to Nate Quarry, what his plan is for the fight.
Is Nate Quarry the only person in his corner other than Couture? Because I don't think that we see anybody else in his team being supportive in any way, at least based, on what we've seen on the last couple episodes.
I want to say there's someone else on the team who we hear yelling like almost comically during the fight. I want to say it's Bonner.
It's Stefan.
Yeah, it's Bonner.
Because Swick didn't like him.
Yeah, it's basically just Nate, to be honest. That's kind of Nate's role, is to be like the Bobby to his Koscheck, right? I guess.
Gotta have the tag match where Nate Quarry uses the crutch as the weapon to win.
There you go.
I mean, he's injured, so I guess he's got nothing else to do but be supportive to Leben. He looks out. Somebody makes a point. It might be Data who says, luckily for Nate, he has more time to rest because we don't have any challenges this week. He just went straight to the fight.
Dana says maybe he'll be out of walk by the time he fights, maybe.
Which implies they would have thrown him out there one-legged to one of those challenges if he hadn't, if that situation hadn't arisen. Joe, we get Dana White explaining to us the history of grudge matches in the UFC. He names Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz and Ken Shamrock, and then, of course, Matt Lindland versus Phil Baroni. I imagine if you got into MMA in the Conor McGregor era and you went back and watched that, you go, who the fuck are Phil Baroni and Matt Lindland?
Yeah. And then you do a Google of Phil Baroni and things take a real turn.
GCW legend Phil Baroni.
Yep, something like that. This does allow for some good shine, though, to give Chuck some love. Because the part of this show we've talked about kind of on and off that stuns me looking back is how little time is dedicated to making you care about Randy versus Chuck. It almost doesn't exist on the show. This is like one of the first times since the first episode that we've seen Chuck kicking some ass. It's like, and Chuck is the ultimate highlight real fighter too. Like the big knockouts, the Iceman deal. Like, so that's really what this allowed to do, right? More than anything else.
That finish of Ortiz has to be like one of the iconic MMA finishes. That combo he just unleashes on him. So fucking great.
Classic celebration and just the absolute rage in the band's. Oh, yeah, it's unbelievable. I've seen it a million times. It still pops me.
Julio, just so you're not left curious, Phil Baroni was a charismatic fighter. Definitely a product of his era, who now will be serving the rest of his life in prison in Mexico for murdering his girlfriend.
Man.
And I once met him and made him mad. So I was at UFC 228 in Dallas, whichever one Darren Till fought Tyron Woodley for the title. And he was just in the concourse, and I asked to take a picture with him. I was like, hey, Phil Baroni. And then I was like, your first fight with Evan Tanner is one of my favorite fights. And he goes, I hate that fucking fight. Thanks for bringing it up. And then he walked away from me.
You dodged a bullet.
I was going to say.
Got a lot worse.
Literally.
They should have brought Alex up to the stand.
He had a temper. And he worked one professional wrestling match and like really punched a guy in the face. It was pretty funny.
Yeah. I would have known he's a great guy.
Yeah. What does Nash say? Doesn't make him a bad guy. You know?
I mean, to be fair, Hugh Jackman did the same thing.
We see Chris Leben training with Randy Couture in the cage, throwing punches that I would not describe as educated, but they definitely have some steam on him. And I guess what he's trying to do is lure him in with his right and then kill him with a left uppercut because he's trying to drill that with Randy. And he exclaims, Toro, bitch, as though he were a bullfighter. And then it goes, spoiler alert, to Leben accurately predicting how the fight's going to go. His talking head, he says, the only way I see Josh Koscheck beat me is if he takes me down and lays on top of me. Well,
he knows, man. Like, there's a lot of bravado. But watching it back, you can absolutely see through his shit here. Like, he knows that most likely Josh is going to take him down, and that's going to be the fight. Like, he can see it coming.
I was wondering if it was accidental self-awareness or real self-awareness that we saw in that moment where he said that. Because it's the only time, I think, that he actually even entertains to the camera the idea that he might lose.
Yeah.
Every other talking head from him is, I'm going to kick his ass. Yeah. He's going to go home in an ambulance. I'm going to destroy him. And there's that one shot was like, did he know they were recording?
Mm-hmm.
So we've established that his hope is to not get taken down and to knock Koscheck out with a power punch. We've also established that his hand is currently just an exposed piece of meat with no protection.
Yeah,
he's good to fight though.
Why? As my first thought was, maybe this guy shouldn't be sparring with strikes. Let's not tenderize that meat anymore. And yet, here we are.
It is strange looking back. The way they talk about Chris, because Chris was always, I mean, the way he throws punches and that's clear, it's like, that's actually how he would fight. Like, he would kind of fight like a drunk man, ironically. Yeah. I mean, I don't even say that being an arsehole. Like, he really would. He would, you know? He would sort of be like a zombie in there at times. And what I didn't realize, because the context of time, like, going into this show, he's like hot shit. He's lost he's got an undefeated record almost, or maybe one loss, I can't recall. Great record. And they talk about him like he's one of the favorites to win it, which makes that line he has even more interesting, where he kind of, you said, Julio, kind of like lets it slip. Like, obviously, other than the idea that maybe he takes me down and just controls me the entire fight, I'm definitely going to win. It's like, well, hold on. Just go back a little bit. And that proved to be the case. So, yeah.
You proclaim your trust, your confidence in Coach Couture's method, strategy. Does that hold after this, after seeing him training?
I knew he was in trouble when Chuck said the following: I'm preparing Josh like I'd prepare anyone. He's getting ready. And at that point, I said, we're in trouble, because if he's getting ready, then we're in some big space. Yeah, I think Randy may have... I don't think he's doing a very good job, to be honest, fellas. I don't want to go out on a limb here. I mean, I'm all in. I've still got the green jacket hanging up, but I don't know if he can do it at this point.
Julio, to kind of what we're talking about, Chuck Liddell as a fighter was a great example of a guy that like fought the way Leben talks about how he's going to fight, because Chuck, there was never a fear of like takedown. He fought some great wrestlers, but right, Joe, he would just come forward because he didn't have a fear of being taken down, and he would just throw fucking bombs.
He was one of the first guys that had truly great defensive wrestling. He could stop takedown attempts because he had that, like, that was kind of his cheat code, right? That's why he was such an awful matchup for Ortiz. He could stuff his takedowns. So yeah, and also the one thing that him and Leben do have in common is that like irrational, fearless, like in terms of getting punched in the face, like, and that would end as, you know, well for both of those guys eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely there.
Well, so here's the question. Do you think this match goes differently if we switch coaches, if it's Chuck coaching Leben?
Ooh.
Maybe it's my couture cope, but I don't think so. I think Josh he's got that wrestling background. The takedown is all he needs to win the round for the most part. So I don't think so.
One thing we see Koscheck doing in training that didn't come into play in the fight that I was very bummed. I don't know, Joe, if you caught it. Koss is drilling the Sakuraba flying punch at one point during the training montage here.
It is insane how he's literally just a wrestler. Like, he's on the feet, he's just like doing stuff. Because, I mean, eventually he would become a serious puncher. He was a knockout artist by the time, you know, while he was a contender. Here he's got no striking. Oh, he looks terrified when they're on the feet, in fact, doesn't he? He looks like, but yeah, his wrestling is so strong.
His one overhand right attempt in the beginning of the fight is like if me and Steve got drunk and tried to fight each other. He just wings it from his asshole. Like he winds it back and just comes over his head with it.
He threw it like Jeff Jarrett throwing a punch.
There's that clip where he's training with Florian and he's exhausted and he like still takes him down. Like, that dude is an animal, man. Like, the best athlete by far on the show, I think.
Back at the house, Forrest with his new haircut, which changes again by the end of this episode, is just going a bit stir crazy. So to kill some time, he mimics a wild ape eating a banana for the amusement of Josh Rafferty and I think Kenny Florian with his shirt off, just sitting there watching what's going on.
So before that, I noted that Forrest, throughout the last two episodes, he's kind of emerged as a sensible talking head.
Yep.
Like at the beginning of this, when he said, well, yeah, they should have fought last night. Of course they're going to fight next. That doesn't make sense. And then 20 minutes later, he is climbing rocks and smashing a banana in his face and letting someone punch him in the forehead. It's just chaos. Like, there's no rhyme or reason to this guy.
I think this is what happens when you know that you need to start building up the other characters in the house.
Yeah.
Whatever they're doing, please put them on screen because they're gonna have to get more screen time in the following episodes.
This is also, I believe, there's a voiceover from Dana during this explaining theoretically why they're going crazy. It's because they don't have access to the outside world, pretty much, and the trash cans toppling over still. So it's time to cut weight. In a genuinely hilarious moment, we get back-to-back clips of both Koscheck and Leben roasting Bobby Southworth for his failed attempt or not failed, but his very brutal weight cut. The funniest part about Koscheck's is he's mimicking him and Chuck Liddell's laughing, and then the camera pans out and Bobby's sitting right there. Just like, what the fuck, man?
Like, Chuck was so tickled by this. Like, Chuck was like, you know, he just wants to be one of the boys. It almost aches his soul that he has to be the adult in the room. So he was so happy to rip Bobby, and then Bobby's like about to cry in the corner.
The way he just scoots his feet when he walks out of the sauna, you know, he gives that look to Koscheck like, all right, you got it under control here. And then he closes the sauna door and just scoots out of frame. He's like, I'm going to go get a beer. We go to the weigh-ins. Mark Ratner appears to be going straight from the UFC PC to catch a flight to Maui because he's got his vacation fit on, looking fantastic. And then Koscheck takes the scale, and boy, do we get some prophetic words from Dana White in a voiceover saying, I have a tough time reading Josh Koscheck. And minor spoiler alert, Julio, kind of almost legendarily so, Josh Koscheck and Dana White would not get along as far as like contract negotiations and shit, to the point where for pretty much the tail end of his UFC run, he wouldn't even work with Dana anymore to get fights made and stuff. He'd work with other people around him. So they had a very contentious relationship, to say the least.
It didn't surprise me because I would just not see them as at least as portrayed on this show. Dana White doesn't seem like a fun guy to be around, and Koscheck seems to be very much like about the fun of it. So taking the fighting aside, like the sport out of it, I don't see them as personalities that will get along to begin with. And then you add the business part of it, and yeah.
Which, of course, it was weird, Joe, because Koscheck was obviously a money player for him for a period of time, but it was always, Dana always had that weird kind of tone when he spoke about Josh Koscheck.
Yeah, that's where with Koscheck I could never figure out, and I still don't know, like where the fiction and reality, because some guys are clearly characters, but there were absolutely people involved in the UFC that just did not like Josh Koscheck personally. Like you could tell it bled through.
Yeah.
I don't know what his reputation was like with training partners. I know that in the welterweight division, if anyone won a fight at 170, they would immediately follow up by calling out Josh Koscheck. And that was the easiest way to become popular in the UFC welterweight division, was just to try and fight Koscheck. So, yeah, I'm not sure. We should know on the other side of things. You know, you've got Dana trying to read Josh, and Chris Leben explains that he is not worried about what Josh Koscheck's thinking. He is, quote, right now, I am worrying about what Chris is thinking. That is a quote from Chris Leben in the middle of this.
Brother.
Incredible piece of business.
The Chris Leben and the Crippler are two different people, dude.
This is where I started to note that, as you guys touched on earlier, that Leben, he's gone from this bravado to now he's almost talking like a scared little boy trying to convince himself
100%. Yep.
that he's going to do, like, this is our first real hint that this is a very insecure man.
Yes.
Who is stuck in this house, and now he's going to be locked in the cage, and he's going to have to back it up.
He's not scared of Koscheck. He's scared of what he thinks the result is going to be if he fights Koscheck. That's the big thing, right? Like, because he sees, again, we talked about it, he sees the route to victory for Josh, and he knows he's now relying on one shot, basically. So, yeah.
So you can see past the facade that Leben is putting on. How do you read? Are you like Dana White? Can you not read Koscheck, or can you tell if he's like, because he seems to be pretty pragmatic about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, it could go bad for me, and then I'll be gone, and somebody's going home, and it could be me. And he seems pretty calm about it. But is
that wrestler mentality, man? Those guys are just wired differently.
Yeah, the element of competition is just so much more. He's so much more at home in that. I think when he gets in the cage, you do see his nerves because he hasn't fought at that level. He's like a novice in MMA. But his mindset is just a lot more, it's just a lot stronger. Like what you describe, you kind of see it, right? Like he's a lot more aware of what he's getting. Chris is like trying to rev himself up, almost try to convince himself, as Steve said. So
I imagine at this point it dawns on Leben, and that's part of his emotional state here, at least the one he projects. I think he's starting to realize this is going to be on national television, and I've like talked myself into this corner. And if I lose, I'm going to look like an asshole.
Yep.
Correct.
We get a talking head of Koscheck making fun of Leben's laugh. He's like, I'm ready to get him out of the house. I'm tired of hearing him. And then he explains like he's fucking Hacksaw Jim Duggan, that he's doing it for all the people. He's like, I'm doing this for everyone that wants him out of the house. And you know, he's a man on a mission. Nate Quarry's on his side quest here, going to the doctor. We still don't really know what his future outlook is. Josh Rafferty still there for whatever reason. We get to Leben's talking head, where he starts talking like fucking Lily Tomlin in Orange County. That scene where Colin Hanks is yelling at her, "You said shoe in," because he keeps just saying, "I'm a shoe in. I'm going to kill him." And then he's talking about paralyzing him, and there's this close up of Leben touching his own mouth about what he wants to do to Josh Koscheck, and it's through the benefit of hindsight and just the shit we're talking about right here, being older and wiser, watching this now too. It is, he knows the walls are closing in. I imagine too, they don't show much of it at training, but you would think they would show him like working on takedown defense or some shit like that. But I think, yeah, just like Joe said, he knows he's down to the one shot.
Yeah, because I think the word in the house would absolutely, I mean, everyone in there would know that Koscheck's wrestling was crazy, right? Like you saw it in the first day when they were picking the teams. So he wasn't blindsided by what was coming up, I don't think. But we should also know it was a great call. They did the wrestling thing of they have all the other fighters give their prediction. They nail this from the way this is put together. Like the whole episode, there's dueling trash talk back and forth. And like the fighters are chipping in, they're talking among themselves. It's really well done in that regard.
Were you surprised that Kenny Florian actually predicted that Leben was going to win?
For sure. Yeah. And that goes back to that earlier thing, and it was lost on me. Like, they talk about Chris like he's one of the absolute favorites. I think they said, I haven't noted here, so Julio, back then the records were very guys would say their record was one thing and it'd be listed as another. It was very unique in that way, different time. He's listed, they say he's 19-1, the fighters, which is crazy because Koscheck's 4-0. He's like 4 fights in his career.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're talking about Chris like he's the favorite to win the whole thing.
So it's day 24. It's fight day now, we're told. We see we get our first Stitch Duran appearance as he's wrapping up Chris Lieben's hands, and he basically looks at his knuckle and says, "Fuck happened?" And and Leben actually in pretty good delivery says, "I got in a fight with a window." I thought that was actually kind of funny. And Stitch is not amused by this at all. He's just, well, you shouldn't have done that, and then keeps wrapping his hands up. In Koscheck's locker room, physical media king Alex Mattis was very aroused to see that cardboard stanchion filled with UFC VHS home videos. I was pausing it and trying to see which ones they had in there, because I've always been on the quest for UFC 22 on VHS, the legendary Frank Shamrock, Tito Ortiz fight. It's not necessarily like hard to track down. It's just been, for the most part, the prices on it when I see it are a bit too high. So I was thinking, like, maybe if that warehouse is still standing, I could break in and steal that stanchion. Who knows? Koscheck's getting ready. Leben, the same. We get our stats here. Josh Koscheck, 26 years old, 4-0. Chris Leben, 24, 15-1, as it's listed here. And I think in his last kind of card to play, Leben comes out with the spooky face, trying to, I think, intimidate Josh Koscheck here. And while, to Joe's point, you can tell there's nerves in Koscheck's, he's nervous. I mean, I would be too. Do you think it's more stressful to fight in this environment or in front of a live crowd? Because like the silence of this would just be terrifying to me. Yeah,
the crowd must give you more adrenaline, right?
I would think so.
Leben's entrance with no like music in this setting is so weird. It's like unsettling. More so probably than if he was walking out in an arena.
Yeah, I can tell you just from doing the small time wrestling that I've done, there is a huge difference in what you're willing to put your body through for the reaction as opposed to just 8 assholes in the corner yelling triangle repeatedly.
Herb Dean Pop, he's our official. Joe, I don't think he's aged a day since this.
He is not. I think he's officiating his age considerably, but he looks exactly the same.
Julio, this fella here, the referee, Herb Dean, is up there with Juice Ben Affleck as like the most famous MMA refs ever. His quality of officiating has varied so greatly. Steve, you're familiar with Herb Dean, right? And like the early stoppages versus some of the shit he's just let go to the point of death.
Yes, lately I think he's been seen in the corner reading War and Peace while there's a fight going on. It's been ridiculous the last couple years.
Cage Potato, which was my like fucking haven for MMA when I was in college, always referred to him as Herb, I've got the papers if you've got the weed, Dean. And so I still reference that nickname to this day. The rules are explained here. We start off. Leben opens up with probably his best moment of success in the fight, where he lands a knee, and then he also catches Koscheck with a hook that kind of wobbles him a little bit. And then Koscheck windmills that aforementioned right hand that's not unlike that episode of The Simpsons where Bart is like, I'm just going to swing in air walking forward, and if you get hit, it's your own fault. That's the mentality we're dealing with here. But it quickly becomes apparent. He bulldozes a takedown. Leben's, we don't even get to see if he has a jiu-jitsu game, because this is not news, Joe. And this is still in play today. A solid wrestling foundation trumps all.
Certainly. And with Josh, it's an elite wrestling foundation, and he's so much more athletic than Leben. It's like Leben will try and do the right things, like he'll try and like wall walk against the fence. Koscheck, even as the smaller man, because Koscheck ultimately fight welterweight, of course, he's so strong physically. You can see it, right? As soon as they grab hold of each other. So it's interesting. Like, I knew where this was going, obviously, but Koscheck is, again, he's a novice, and his chin is way up in the air. But as soon as he grabs a hold of Leben, it's a completely different fight.
And Julio, this is the UFC's history is riddled with champions and long dominant fighters that come from a wrestling base, be it John Jones, George St. Pierre, Khabib. So this is not like news to us watching here, but to you as, bringing a fresh set of eyes. Did you find any of this surprising, that he was just able to completely nullify everything that Leben was doing? It's obviously not the most aesthetically pleasing or exciting for terms of like fanfare, but it's definitely I always found it to be like interesting that technique just can completely void someone's entire game.
I don't know if surprising is the right. I think that the show, I can't fault the show in the way that at least they prepared me for that, because they have several people predicting this. And so when it happened, I felt like, all right, so they knew what they were talking about. And the wrestling basically overpowered anything else that Leben could have done. That's not to say that I was certain that was going to be the outcome, because I expected Leben to maybe get out of it at any point and just land a good hit. So I did not know how this was going to go. I didn't have the certainty that Koscheck was going to prevail, because I was looking at it from the point of view of like the storytelling part of it. And I'm thinking, when they're editing this episode, maybe they're trying to make it look like it could go either way, which I guess it were. But then at the end, it's, they just try to give Leben this sort of positive spin in the last couple episodes. Is that because they know that he's going to stick around, and so they need us to not hate him as much? I was trying to look at it that way. As far as the fight itself, it didn't surprise me. It didn't surprise me that he got taken down, but I didn't know that was going to be like the finishing move. Like I guess what surprised me was that what you just said, it's not very exciting to watch. Yeah. And I think that not having watched many UFC fights really, or even like paid attention to them, I think I might have mentioned it when we first started this series of recordings. Like, what I go from is what I've seen in movies, and so in movies it's always very exciting. Yeah. they give you like the power moves, and there's a lot of flair, and there's like the perfect shots, and this is just Koscheck lying on top of Leben. Yeah, most of the round, both rounds. So I was like, it was that conflict of, I'm glad because my guy's winning, but I'm also kind of bummed that it's not exciting to watch.
It wouldn't be a great end to the movie, would it, this fight? And then he controlled him. Better wrestler. It is what it is. 28 on the scorecards,
Is this what you see often, though?
Yeah, especially, I think it was even more often back then because guys were not as good off their back, and they was like, now there's more defense. Koscheck has a lot of fights in his professional career like this, where he can just control guys. And he only honestly wouldn't do this if he felt like he could win on the feet. He could do this against most guys, to be honest.
I was waiting for the moment where he would lift Leben off the ground and then slam him on the mat.
Sometimes.
Numerous times.
Yeah. There must be fights in Josh's career where he does like a more explosive takedown. There has to be. I can't recall. But yeah, that would sometimes happen. This is a lot more kind of dull than that, sadly.
Yeah.
Well, even later in the fight, there was 2 occasions where they got stood up, and Koscheck's answer to that was just to go for a Arn Anderson scoop slam instead, and end up right back in control.
He several times in the first round knees Chris Leben in his asshole, like he just winds his knee back. And speaking of that, I guess since we're already here talking about the wrestlers and stuff, Steve, you've watched UFC kind of off and on. What were your thoughts on Georges St-Pierre? Because he was someone that was very divisive in that realm of a lot of his fights looked like this, but he was a fucking superstar, man.
It's funny you mentioned GSP, because the fight where he fought Koscheck came to mind, to where he's just continually punching him in one eye to show that he could. And that picture after the fight of Koscheck with one eye swollen shut is just crazy. Like, I think Georges St-Pierre was such an elite athlete who is not really talked about a whole lot these days. Partially because of how it all kind of fell apart near the end, with him just kind of petering out. Yeah, I was a huge, that whole Murderers Row champions of that era were like my guys,
Yeah, Julio, GSP, probably, Joe, it's fair to say top 3 all-timer?
I think so, and I've actually noticed young fans, maybe actually the ones that do know, do appreciate him more, because we remember the debates about those fights where he would control guys on the ground. He was divisive, to your point. I think because of the damage that guys like Anderson have done to that, BJ Penn, and then some, have done their legacy. I think GSP's kind of aged more gracefully as a result. But yeah, he's definitely one of the top 3 guys, I think.
He won the middleweight title and was like, I changed my mind. I'm done.
Yeah.
But
I knew the name sounded familiar, Alex. I had to look him up. He plays Batroc the Leaper in the second Captain America movie. So, he's part of the MCU.
I was going to bring it around for you, damn it. But the point of this story is that a lot of his fights looked like what we watched here, but he became like a massive draw for that company. He fought at the Sky Dome in Toronto and like 50,000 people were there. And he had like one of the worst title fights ever against this fucking bum named Jake Shields. But people loved him. It's because he had a good look. And when he did execute takedowns, they were explosive. So like, his takedowns you could make highlight reels out of. But yeah. Point being, Julio, you can now say if you're in a bar at some point and someone's watching UFC, you can just turn to him and go, nothing really beats a solid wrestling foundation. That's what you can say to him. At one point, Koscheck's working Leben against the corner, and Chuck is just like, he's got his hands on the side of the octagon, and he's leaning at like an angle, peering into the cage, like a little kid peering into the room that their parents are watching an R-rated movie in. Like he's just kind of looking, and he doesn't say anything, and his eyes are as big as saucers. It's very strange.
Chuck has his quirks, but I'm sorry to circle back once again. This is where Randy lost me beyond repair. This was where I said enough. When he reports to Chris Leben that he may have won the round.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what was that crazy, all of you too? I was like, what is he talking about? They won the round.
I thought that I was missing something. I thought maybe he is. I thought that maybe that it's bad that Koscheck was not giving us a lot of variety, and that's what the scoring system goes for.
You wasn't missing something. Randy Couture has been missing a lot of things during this process. Very sad moment.
I think that wasn't Randy the coach. I think that was Randy the dad, recognizing that he had a very fragile son in front of him.
Good call.
And that if he didn't believe in himself, he was going to actually die.
Good call.
So yeah, man, you're doing all right out there, bud. Just keep at it, and it'll turn around.
Keep plugging away.
Dad loves you. He gives him a kiss on the forehead and slaps his ass and sends him back out there.
Joe, how beast would it have been if he's just telling Leben, he's like, Boss Rutten beat Kevin Randleman fighting off his back. You can do it too.
And obviously, if we're getting ahead of myself, but it's like at the end, he's like, get ready, third round coming. It's like, no, there's no third. It's over, Randy. It's finished.
Leben's probably best attempt is at the bell of round 1 where he completely misses a shot, to which Herb Dean responds, woo! And then they go back to their corners. Chuck actually gives direction here, which we've joked a lot about Chuck Liddell as a coach, and he tells him the right thing. He's like, don't fuck with him on the feet, take him down and hold him down. You're not going to win the 5 Gs, but, fuck it. And round 2 begins, and I was not prepared for how hard I was going to laugh. There's just silence and the scuffling of the feet on the octagon. And then Stephan Bonner, at an uncomfortably loud pitch, goes, set the pace. And that's all he says. And then it's quiet again for like 30 seconds. The takedowns continue. He works into half guard. Bit of a quizzical stand-up because he's in fucking half guard and he's punching him. But, Herb wants action. The wrestling's just too much for Chris Leben to conquer. Dana White then explains when the fight ends that it's going to a decision, because I guess this would have been the first decision on the show. So he has to explain to the audience at home what that means. And
that the worst thing that can happen to a fighter is if it goes to a decision, apparently.
He still says that shit to this day.
Still says it. Yeah. Like, blames the fighters. Insane.
That's the first. You can't leave it in the hands of the judges. In later seasons, that's actually on a sign in the locker room as they're coming out. A stern reminder from Uncle Dana: do not leave it in the hands of the judges.
Yeah, there's no room for the sport to improve the judging. The fighters just simply have to finish the toughest guys in the world. It's on them.
That's how you win $5,000, pal.
Yep.
Josh Koscheck, wins the decision. But yeah, Team Green over there is like, third round coming up, baby. And then I quote this regularly, like playing video games or just, shit talking with someone. When Josh Koscheck's announced the winner, he tells Chris Leben, that's your bus ticket home. and then like in this extremely awkward series of events, he's talking shit. That's your ticket home. And then he comes forward kind of with his hand out to shake his hand. And then Leben kind of half shakes his hand while calling him a fucking pussy. He's like, fucking pussy. And then he starts talking about they're just gonna lay on people, just boring. While Koscheck's in the cage going, "Go home!" just yelling at him. It's the fight wasn't very entertaining, but the post fight certainly was.
I was glad that they explained the clean break thing, because it happens twice during the fight, and I didn't know what caused it. There was it was like clean break because it's boring, or clean break because they did something that I missed. And apparently, it's if you are just on top of him and not advancing your position, right?
Yeah.
Which the counter to that has always been, if the fight is boring on the feet, they're not going to put them on the ground. But obviously, that's like the sports way of being like, we're going to try and make it exciting. The issue is, as Josh does in this, he can just shoot another takedown immediately. So it's kind of, it is what it is.
To give you an example of how they kind of position themselves as a company in that striking versus, on the ground shit, their video games they make now have an option where you can turn off the grappling.
Yeah.
Like, got to make it exciting. Those new games. You've played the EA ones, right, Steve?
Yes.
They don't have shit on the THQ ones.
No, especially the one that had the Pride mode. That was incredible.
That game, a couple of weeks ago, my friend was over and we played that game. He'd never played anything in the clips, and he immediately was like, "This is better than the EA games. It holds up. It's awesome."
Yeah,
It's
awesome.
the no mercy of MMA games for sure.
There you go.
Chris Leben, surprisingly, Julio, is a very gracious loser. He's just talking shit, calling him a pussy, says he's boring, etc., etc. So, this has been our voyage thus far, is Julio Oliveira getting invested in the Josh Koscheck, Chris Leben dynamic. So the fight may have not played out like in a movie-style fashion, but is this a moment of satisfaction for you here as Chris is getting escorted out and Koscheck's just telling him to go home?
Yes, it was. I was not looking forward to an episode 7 where I had to listen to Leben brag about how he beat Koscheck. So if anything, we were spared that. And I think that the right thing happened. I think that you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that at least as far as the current circumstances on the show, the best fighter won. Is that a correct assessment?
Definitely. And I think, again, we'll get more into it down later on, but I think that would prove to be the case beyond this too, right? I mean, I think that's a sign of things to come. I'll put it that way.
How did you feel about the fact that Nate was by Leben's side before Couture even came out to console him?
Before we get there, because that's the closing shot here, before we fire up the Spanish guitar to serenade Leben on his way out, the blue team come together for Bobby's favorite, flawless victory. Half of Forrest Griffin's head is shaved, and it's not drawn attention to at all. He's just there with half of his head shaved. And so then we go outside. Like I said, the melancholic Spanish guitar picks up, very, very somber. And Nate's there just kind of, coalescing Leben, I guess you would say. And then Dana comes out and he's just like, quit crying. And Leben says, like, you just want another boring wrestler. And Dana drops on him, hey, man, it's just the way the UFC is. And lets him know, this is the big boy games here. I probably in real time, I was watching this thinking, oh, man, sucks for Leben. Watching it now and having the benefit of knowing what's coming, it's just kind of like, all right, dude, you talked all that shit. And watching it now, 20 years later, karmically, it feels just that he goes out the way he does.
So I love that Leben is sitting in the grass crying, and the pals gather around him. It occurs to me at this point that it's very possible that these fights are happening in like an industrial park area, and that just off camera, there's like a Initech type company. These guys are on their lunch watching these assholes crying in the grass while they're eating their triangle sandwiches.
Hey, Chris, did you lose? Oh, that's too bad.
You see my stapler?
Oh, Jesus. To send us off here, I'm not kidding. There's an over-the-shoulder shot of Nate Quarry watching the car with Chris Leben drive away. And all that was missing is fucking Sarah McLachlan's I Will Remember You should have been playing at this point in the show. Julio and I talk about this all the time when we cover movies that we've seen several times before, but when you watch it, taking notes and trying to pay attention to talking points and shit, the presentation of the Nate-Chris friendship in this is just ridiculous. How they're just like, you're my best friend. And it just happens like immediately. And Nate Quarry is just like the the ambassador of like moral high ground. It's very funny.
It comes off like Nate's just bored. Like he knows his ankle's doomed. He's, I'm gonna find something to do in this house. I'm gonna be Chris Leben's friend.
Well, he knows that, the Chris Jericho thing, if he pairs with him, he'll be on TV more. So, get the rub off that, brother.
One of them uses alcohol as a crutch. The other uses an actual crutch. Coming to CBS this fall.
Brother. All right, boys. So between this and the previous episode, I mean, Joe and Julio called it out. It feels like we potentially peaked, but I don't know. Julio, is there anything that you're interested in moving forward that you're looking forward to? Any characters that you're still invested in?
It's difficult. This is the mid-season finale, right? Like this is from here. It's like the season takes a break. If it was being shown today, it takes a break and come back in a couple months. I'm mildly interested in seeing who wins. As far as will be one of the people I know, or is it going to be one of the unknowns that's been in the background that suddenly is going to come to prominence in the second half of the season? But it's difficult to. I mean, I don't know. The thing that I keep falling back on is that I know that this was their first season. So obviously maybe they hadn't mastered the art of storytelling in a reality show. And so it could be possible that we get a second season that kind of comes out of nowhere with like new characters and storylines. So far, I haven't seen anything set up in these first 6 episodes that tells me what the second half of the season is going to be about. This seemed to be mostly about Leben being an asshole and somebody was going to put a stop to him. And that happened. So now I guess, I don't particularly care if Liddell wins versus Couture winning. That's I probably should be more invested in that, but I'm not because I don't think they're that invested in it. Who do I know? I mean, I know Kenny Florian. I know Forrest now from the last couple episodes. Diego is probably the one that I know the most, so I'll be curious next time that Diego fights. I'll be curious to see how it goes, but that might not happen for another 3 episodes. So I don't know. It's an interesting place for episode 7 because I think that they're going to have to come up with another thing equal to Leben Koscheck to build up to. That's tricky, and I don't know when they started editing this, if they already had all the footage, because if they did, that's troublesome that they couldn't lay the foundation for the full season in the first 6 episodes. I don't know. I'll tell you this, Alex. Dana White, maybe that's what I'm interested in, like the evolution of Dana White as the leader of this outfit. He said the smartest thing he said in 6 episodes of the show was when he was summing up the fate of Leben, and he said that he was a great fighter, but he was mentally weak. And that was probably not the nicest way of putting it, but I thought that it really encapsulated what brought him down at the end, right? Like a couple other people said it during the episode. They're like, if he goes out and starts fighting with his heart, he's going to lose. He needs to be strategic in order to beat Koscheck. And looks like he didn't, so he lost. And for Dana White, who has seen pretty... I don't know, you guys know him. Does he know what he's talking about? Or is he mostly like spouting platitudes?
Yeah, probably the second one, I think. But I think, he's a broken clock, right? Right twice a day. Right. I think that's probably the case here.
Maybe it was incredibly obvious, even to them as they were recording,
right.
that Leben, his mental state was not strong enough for him to actually win against a fighter that could be strategic. So I don't know. But when he said that, I was like, man, this is probably the first time that I've agreed with this guy on anything.
Yeah. And that does allow for, like, we have fun with the kind of educate the audience on it's ridiculous. I mean, come on, look at this show. But there is, I think, Leben inadvertently, like accidentally provides like an interesting kind of case study in that regard. Because he's clearly tough as nails, but he has like a lot of things that are part of make him a fighter, good and bad. And I think that kind of revealed itself here. So yeah, I'm with you.
Absolutely. I don't actually remember a whole lot of what happens after this, because as we've kind of hammered to the ground here, it feels like the peak. It feels like everything has been built to this, and now it's the morning after. And what do we do from here? So it's going to be fun to see how they build the second half of the season. I mean, I obviously remember who wins, but I don't quite remember how we got there. So I'm looking forward to reliving that in my brain.
I think it'd be funny if we keep getting cutaways to whatever Chris Leben is doing after he exits the show, just because they know he was a big part of the first half of the season. So like, we got to keep him in for the ratings.
It's that episode of Married with Children where Peggy was pregnant So the header of Winker County calling in. It'll be
Yes.
Leben calling in from a payphone at his dad's house in Nevada.
Well, it seems as though, we finished the story. But, Joe, what does Triple H say about the story?
It never ends, bro. It goes on. Tune in next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of TUFtwenty. A reminder to subscribe to the podcast, visit wearethecontrarians.com, and follow the Contrarians across social media at Contrarian Prime.
You can also follow Alex individually at Contrarian Alex, and you can check out our other special projects on our Patreon channel at patreon.com/Contrarian Prime. If you want to listen to Alex teach me about The Rock and John Cena, that's where you need to go.
You can catch me weekly on the Late Night Grin, live and free on YouTube every Friday night. In addition, Alex and I collaborate monthly on Grin Grappler, discussing some of pro wrestling's biggest and baddest. If those grins are for you, check out LNG Gold, our YouTube membership plan that includes over 50 hours of exclusive content each month.
You can follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at NotDrDeath. That's NotDreath. Or you can block me now and save us both a lot of embarrassment.
Until next time, be sure to make your coaches proud and don't call anyone a fatherless bastard.